You're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Julia Kim. Our top stories this hour. After a century, 26 artefacts from Benin will be displayed at home. We'll get the latest from Cotonou, the Beninese capital, with Georgia Calvin-Smith, who's standing by live for us in just a minute. Well, the artefacts were looted from the kingdom of Dahomey, what is now modern-day Benin. We'll have more on the significance of the restitution of these treasures with our guest later on in the programme. And no breakthrough over an international intellectual property waiver on COVID vaccines at an EU-African Union summit. But 6 African countries will get mRNA vaccine technology as part of the World Health Organization project. But first, for the first time, 26 treasures that had been looted by the French will be exhibited in the Beninese capital here this weekend. Well, the 26 royal artefacts were returned by Paris's Quai Branly Museum after 129 years in exile. Well, for more, let's cross live to Georgia Calvin-Smith, who joins us live from the Beninese capital, Cotonou. Georgia, tell us, what's the significance of this restitution?
Well, Julia, so the actual exhibition will be open to the public on Sunday. And on Friday night, I was amongst those who were lucky enough to get a bit of a preview into the exhibition. Now, amongst those who were at the showing, there was a lot of dynamism, there was a lot of excitement, but what was actually really interesting was that there was a lot of emotion. There were a couple of people who almost were expressing their feelings of almost being brought to tears, because it's not just about this significance of rolling back the cultural legacy of colonialism, being close to these pieces that were actually created by the ancestors of Benin today, and all of the history that's imbued within it, which also creates this bridge to the kind of cultural scene that the government's very keen on giving an economic boost to today. Seemed to really hit home to a lot of the kind of elites, the politicians, the artists that were here at the showing on Friday night. Now, I did ask them, do you think that it's a bit elitist, that the ordinary Beninese person would feel any kind of significance from it? And what I was being told was that, yes, that this is something that really kind of echoes very closely to Beninese people of all levels of society. And also it is, as I mentioned, tying in with the government's plans of trying to really boost its kind of cultural and artistic capital to try and put Benin on the map as a kind of global cultural platform. So this is just the beginning. There's still about 90%, it's estimated, of not just Benin's but Africa's cultural heritage currently being held in European collections. And this is just a small step in the direction of, trying to really see restitution be kind of picked up by European collectors on a kind of larger scale. But the symbolism of this is both exciting economically, but also almost existentially.
So yes, a small but significant step, an existential milestone, if you want. But now that this milestone has been achieved, what next for Benin?
So this specific exhibition is just going to be at the Presidential Palace until the 22nd of May, because what has been kickstarted by the restitution is this plan of really kind of ramping up Benin's cultural investment. And it's not just kind of an abstraction. It is the actual amount of money that Benin and Benin sponsors are going to be driving into its kind of cultural and artistic scene. So over the next 4 years or so, I think it's between now and 2026, an estimated 1 billion euros is going to be invested in the country's infrastructure. About 4 huge museums, world-class museums, which are going to be focusing on everything from the history of slavery to voodoo to contemporary art, are going to be built. And this specific exhibition is only going to be here for a short time, but ultimately it's going to be moved to Abomey, where a special site is going to be dedicated just to these first 26 pieces that have been returned from France as part of a larger push to try and reclaim parts of Benin's artistic heritage that are currently being held elsewhere.
That sounds great. I wish I could be there with you. Thank you very much for that, Georgia Calvin-Smith there reporting to us from Cotonou.
I wish you could be here as well.
Well, now the Kingdom of Dahomey reigned for 300 years, emerging as a major power until the end of the 19th century when the French conquered. For more on the historical context of these artefacts, here's France 24's Emmanuel Sodji and Emmanuel Landé.
On November 17, 1892, after several weeks of violent fighting, France's Colonel Dodds directed soldiers to lay siege to the Kingdom of Béarn, one of the fiercest resistors to French colonisation. As spoils of war, its heritage was plundered, including giant carved wooden thrones, sacred doors, statues of the god Gu, and those of the kings of Glélé and Béarn. Shortly after his election in 2016, Benin's president Patrice Talon demanded the restitution of all artefacts looted in Dahomey by the French colonial troops. At the time, former President François Hollande categorically refused the request. But in 2017, during current French President Emmanuel Macron's first trip to Africa, there was a surprise announcement in Ouagadougou.
I want the conditions to be met within 5 years for temporary or permanent restitution of African heritage in Africa.
When Emmanuel Macron met with Benin's president in March 2018, he wasn't considering the complete return of African artefacts, rather loans and cooperation between museums in the two countries. A few months later, Senegalese and French academics Bénédicte Savoy and Felwine Sarr released a report on the sensitive issue of restitution. This prompted Macron towards the decision to finally and absolutely return ownership of 26 works to Benin. It took several months for the French Parliament to approve the restitution, but that hurdle was finalised on December 18, 2020. For the last time, the classical art of Benin was exhibited with great fanfare at the Quai Branly Museum before the transfer of ownership was signed between the French and Beninese ministers of culture. On the eve of their departure, Emmanuel Macron and Patrice Talon ratified the return of 26 royal treasures of Abomey.
It's the entire Beninese people who express their gratitude. I'm confident that it will not stop there. I have the assurance that very soon, since you have instructed the legislative work, the rest will know the same fate as the 26 works I take with me.
The next day, and after almost 130 years of forced exile, the royal treasures of Benin made a triumphant return to their native land.
Well, we can now talk to Imo de Medeiros, a Beninese French artist who's based in Paris and also in Cotonou. Tell us, Imo, what does the restitution of these artefacts today symbolize for you?
For me, it symbolizes a victory of ethics, in a way, because in this particular case, in France, the law was against restituting those works, and they ended up returning. So I think it's a victory for peace, and I think it's a victory. It's a moral victory, and I think also it opens a new path because I think it both honors France and Benin. Benin, of course, because the restitutions, these are the first restitutions ever, which, it has historical proportions. But also, it's also the start of a relationship where France admits, and Benin agree that the past is the past and that it can be used to move forward.
So would you say that this is the turning of a page in the post-colonial relationship?
Yeah, I do think so. I think it's an idea of history happened, and but now this is a post-colonial world, and it's a multipolar world also. So how do we build new relationships in a new era, and also in a new civilization, which is digital?
Right, because we were talking to Georgia Calvin-Smith earlier, and she was talking about how, there is almost like an existential significance the restitution of these artifacts to Benin has brought about. People are feeling like, I don't know, something that they've never felt before. There are those, though, that do say that perhaps they shouldn't be there. I mean, what do you make of arguments that European countries are better equipped, for example, to look after these treasures?
I think it's an old argument, and I think it's a tired one. And until recently, it was the argument that was also used to justify the Elgin marble staying in Great Britain instead of returning to Greece. No, I mean it's just counterfactual. It all depends on the budget, literally, and how you invest in conserving, treasures, national treasures. So obviously, if which is the case, a museum is built according to international norms, I don't see how the argument could be valid. You know? I
Okay.
think I'm a little suspicious of the argument, like why in Benin couldn't be works of art preserved? I think it's fairly weird.
Well, it's an argument that definitely warrants some exploration, but Imo Demirdira, so I'm afraid that's all the time we have time for this evening. We'll have to leave it there. So thank you very much
Sure.
for sharing your thoughts with us on Eye on Africa tonight.
Thank you.
Well, moving along, and the European Union summit ended today in Brussels with no breakthrough over an intellectual property waiver on COVID vaccines. Instead, 6 African countries will get mRNA vaccine technology as part of a World Health Organization project. About 12% of the continent is fully vaccinated. Well, for more, let's go live to Brussels and join France 24's Dave Keating. Dave, the EU said no to waiving vaccine patents, but it did announce this technology transfer. Are African leaders happy with this outcome, and will it be enough to tempt them away from Chinese influence?
Well, I think there's a widespread dissatisfaction among African leaders that the European countries are still not willing to vote for this TRIPS waiver that would completely waive the intellectual property rights of COVID-19 vaccines and allow any facility in Africa to start making them. What this compromise agreement that was made today will do is set up these 6 sites that will be technology transfer hubs where the IP can be sent and kind of monitored and shared in this controlled way, and so that more vaccines can be made in Africa. Right now, out of all the vaccines being administered in Africa, only 1% were produced in Africa. Africa's having to import all of those vaccines. So this is an effort to try to rectify that situation, but in a way that keeps the intellectual property ownership with the drug makers, because as French President Emmanuel Macron said at a press conference earlier today, you really have to safeguard those IP rights. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was saying the same thing. Now, we did hear at the end of the summit from Moussa Faki, who's the chairman of the African Union, that he in general is happy with this summit. He liked that this time they did it in a roundtable format. He said that allowed the leaders to be more frank with each other because they were actually talking to each other rather than at each other in speeches. And the other big difference about this summit, these summits have happened for quite a while now, every couple of years, but this summit was between the European Union and the African Union. Before, these have been EU-Africa summits.
Right.
So obviously the African Union is not really the same thing as the EU, but this was an effort to try to bolster that organization.
Okay. David Keating, thank you very much for that. That's all the time we have for this evening. I'm afraid we'll have to let you go now. That's all from us here on Eye on Africa. There's more news coming up. Stay tuned after the break.